Shabbat Shalom. One of the things that has always puzzled me about the portion we read today is that when Uncle Laban switches in Leah for Rachel, does a last-minute bridal substitution, how does Jacob not figure that out sooner? Now, it troubles the rabbis as well, and they come up with all kinds of answers. So after all, there was a society where men and women did not necessarily have a lot of close contact unless they were already married. So if you've only seen someone from afar while they're wearing a veil, maybe you won't know. Another suggests that they are twins, so the only thing that's different about them is their eyes. Another is that Rachel actually told Leah some of the signs and inside jokes between them so that Leah could pull off the ruse. But nevertheless, right, he had a whole evening with this woman, and the whole time she was not who he thought she was. And the verse tells us like this: Vehi baboker vehine hi Leah. The morning came, vehine, behold, she was Leah. And so this word vehine is actually a word that appears something like 55 times in the book of Genesis. Yes, I counted. But a surprising number of them are actually in this portion. And so when you are reading a biblical story and the same word appears many times, that word is usually meant to be a key, a clue, an insight into what's going on. And so this word vehine, right, it doesn't mean that she was magically turned into Leah, right? She was Leah all along, and it's only now after like 12 hours that he has finally figured it out. So vehine is a word that implies that you may be the last one in on the joke, but now you are finally aware, this sudden bolt from the blue, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. And vehine is actually the leading word that kicks off the whole story. So in 28:12, when Jacob is putting his head down to sleep on his pillow of rocks, he has a dream. Vehine sulam mutzav arza. Behold, there is a ladder on the ground whose head reaches up to heaven. Now, by the way, in that vision, that ladder, which the mystics tell us was used by the angels from the land of Israel to ascend to heaven, and the angels from heaven to ascend to accompany Jacob into the rest of the world, that ladder is always there. Vehine, Jacob finally sees it. Or the next thing, the very next verse, Vehine Adonai Elohim nitzav alav. And behold, God is standing over him. It's not like God suddenly appeared. God is everywhere all the time. Right? It's that he realizes. A few verses later, a chapter later, he comes to Haran. Vayar vehine be'er basadeh. He sees, behold, there is a well in the field. It's not that the well just magically appeared, right? This is not like the well of Yishmael. This is not like the well of Miriam that's magic. The well has always been there. He just figured it out. And by the vehine, and behold, there are 3 flocks coming. He finds out that Laban lives in town. He says to the people, Hashalom lo. How's Laban doing? And they say, Shalom, Laban's doing great. Vehine Rachel bitoba im hatzon. Oh, and by the way, behold, Rachel is coming with the flocks. The well is there. Laban is there. Rachel's there. He is the new ingredient. So it's not that anything has changed. Jacob, Laban, Rachel, the well have been there for years. Jacob shows up and finally is in on what is happening. Jacob has this moment of realization. His eyes are opened that there's something going on. It's not something new, it's new to him. So on the internet, we might say, today I learned. Or, I was today years old when I discovered that. But that actually happens fairly often in life, that we learn things that we did not know before. So small things like in Florida, some of the toll roadways, they will bill you by your license plate. Others, no, you have to send in an envelope with a check for 75 cents. Bigger things. Sometimes we wake up and we realize that a situation is different than we thought it was, that we have been in a relationship for years, and we realize that this person is more than we thought they were, right? This is the premise of every romantic comedy. We have been friends forever, Harry and Sally, vehine. What do you know? We should get married. I am glad that you guys have seen When Harry Met Sally. That's great. Today I learned that people younger than me have also seen When Harry Met Sally. Great. Right? But by the way, that also happens in negative ways, right? You have been in a relationship with someone for years and you realize that they have been changing, or that maybe they were never the person you thought they were. That happens in our portion in a different sort of way. Vayar Yaakov, Jacob sees the face of Lavan, Lavan's countenance. Vehine, inono imo kitmol shosham. Behold, he was not with him. Jacob has this realization that, wait, Laban is not who I thought he was. Well, by the way, who did you think he was? He swapped wives on you the first week you met, right? Wait, but now you realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe this Laban guy isn't so honest after all. But that happens too often, right? That we are in a situation which is deteriorating, which is declining, and there's finally a moment when we realize, wait a minute, this is not what it is supposed to be. So we see that sometimes with our health. There is a relative who is beloved, and we almost don't wish to admit that they are moving towards dementia. And there's the moment we realize they need a different kind of a help, a different kind of environment than we thought they did. Or there's this ache and this pain, you're like, no, I'll soldier through. And there's the day you realize, nope, I really need to get this checked out. I can't let this go on any longer. Or you're in a job and you realize, this is not the job I thought it was. Or you have an employee who it turns out has quiet quit, right? Who actually, they have stopped working there, you just didn't realize it. It happens in the broader world as well. So I think many of us are still processing the news of the most awkward dinner to take place in Florida a week ago, even though I was there with my family, which is that Kanye West brought a white supremacist to dinner at Mar-a-Lago. Now, by the way, since then, right, that Kanye says something horrible about Jews is no longer news. Getting yourself thrown off Twitter is actually much harder than it used to be. But I will say the person he brought with him, Nick Fuentes, if you haven't heard of this guy, is in a whole different category. And I hate to give him any oxygen, but sometimes you have to lift up a rock to see what's crawling under it. So this is a guy who posts videos that says that the Holocaust couldn't have happened, but if it did, it was hilarious. And so here's the thing. When a person like that is welcome at dinner with a former president of our country, that is a problem for everyone. And so I have conversations with people and they say about the host of this dinner, how can someone be an anti-Semite if they have a Jewish son-in-law, Jewish grandchildren? Well, Laban also had a Jewish son-in-law and Jewish grandchildren. And sometimes he did things that were great for them, sometimes less so. Laban is never going to kill his own grandchildren. But Laban is interested in Laban. Laban is interested in about getting and making the best deal for himself. How do I end up with the most sheep? What happens to Jacob is not relevant. And if something bad happens to Jacob, that's not his concern. So we live in a world where about 5 weeks ago, I gave a sermon talking about the very beginning of the flood, and that before the rains poured down, there was a drip, there was a drip, there was a drip, right? Not even worth bringing out an umbrella. But eventually there's a flood and everything is washed away. Well, we are living in a time when there is a normalization, a mainstreaming of things that were always out there, but would never have been said out in the open. So some of us are old enough to remember when the South was a place of genteel anti-Semitism, right? Right? I would never say anything bad about you, just don't live in my neighborhood or go to my country club. We are now living at a moment of vehine. We are now living at a moment where people who believe and say out loud the most incredibly hateful things about all kinds of people. I am most interested in Jews, but not only. Say hateful things about any kind of person you can imagine, are now getting airtime. And so I think for some people, this perhaps is the vehine moment. This is perhaps the moment of saying, you know what? I have to think about who is having dinner with who. And if I don't like the answer to that question, then I need to say something, even if before I was willing to excuse behavior because it was convenient. Vehine, behold. So Jacob, when he realizes that Laban might not be his friend, has to decide what to do about that. And in the end, he and Laban agree to disagree. They make a pact, they make a monument. I'm going this way, you're going that way. But in the end, the relationship is still there because he still has Laban's daughters and grandchildren are his family. We don't necessarily have the convenience of saying we are off on our own. Because even in Israel, one is not immune to what happens hither, thither, and yon. And so I would suggest to you that we are living in a moment of our eyes being open, when vihine is the leading term, not just for Jacob, but also for us. That we have to be very mindful about who our friends are and who are merely our bedfellows, who we can trust and who we trust but with caution, and who we really need to be looking out for. One final vihine in our portion this week. 28:15. God appears after the whole vision with the ladder. God appears and says, Vehine anochi imach. Behold, I am with you. God is not saying, well, from now on, I am with you. God is saying, I have always been with you. That ladder has always been there. You just are now noticing it. I am now peeking out from heaven and saying that I am here. And so Vehine talks about those things that are happening all along until the moment we realize it. Vehine is also a positive. Vehine is also that moment when we realize that God is with us. Vehine is also that moment. There's one of these stories that I get emailed about once a week. It goes something like this. I looked back on my life and I saw there were footsteps on a beach. And when life was good, there were 2 sets of footsteps. But then when life was tough, there was only one. And God, I see you were with me. There were 2 sets of footsteps. And then when things were bad, there was only God. Where were you? And God was like, no, that's when I was carrying you. I don't know, when I look at the beach, I see just more of like a big mess of like ruts and things being dragged hither and thither and sand being thrown and starfish and I don't even know. But here's the thing. To have that moment of realization that even though life is complicated, even though there are Labans in our lives and much, much worse, Those moments of realization that God is with us are incredibly important. So my hope and my prayer for each of us this week is to plug into that term vihine wherever it applies. If we are in our personal lives to have those realizations about who we are, about the things that we have been trying to ignore in ourselves we need to address, but also maybe the blessings that we haven't realized, the relationships that are troubling and troublesome, but also those moments we wake up and realize this is someone who is our friend. This is someone who has been with us through thick and thin, and we just haven't been paying attention. Those moments when we realize vihine, there are problems, there are threats that we did not think, that we had hoped we would not have to consider. But conversely, vihine, those moments when we realize that God has been with us all along. Shabbat shalom.